Every constellation in the zodiac is a Greek funeral. Look up tonight and find any of the 12 familiar shapes, and you are looking at someone who fell or fled, or boasted too loudly, or loved the wrong god. The lion that could not be killed. The crab crushed under a hero's heel. The girl who slipped from a flying ram and drowned in the sea now named after her. The boy carried off by an eagle. The goddess of justice who packed her things and left humanity behind because she could not stand to watch us anymore. Each of them nailed to the night sky more than 2,000 years ago, and still up there now, every clear evening, in the order the Babylonians arranged them and the Greeks named. The story you have been told about astrology, sun signs, personality types, what your zodiac means about your love life, is the very last and thinnest layer. Underneath it is something much older and stranger and far more interesting. The original 12 constellations of the zodiac were not personality archetypes. They were memorials. 12 specific deaths, abductions, transformations, and impossible feats, given a permanent place in the sky so that the people involved could not be forgotten. Tonight, we are going to walk slowly across the night sky, east to west, and look at each one for what it actually is. Not the horoscope version, the original. Let me settle in with you. Pour something warm if you would like. Adjust the pillow. Give yourself permission not to remember any of this in the morning. None of what I am going to tell you is on the test, because there is no test. There is only the sky, and a long, quiet walk through it, and 12 very old stories that the people who first told them believed were stitched into the world above their heads. Permanent, beautiful, sad, and still visible from your window if the night is dark enough. The Greeks did not invent these constellations. Most of them they inherited from the Babylonians, who had been watching the same patterns of stars for 1,000 years before any Greek was born. But the Greeks did something with them that was uniquely theirs. They turned each one into a story about somebody, a specific somebody, with a name. We will come back, by the end of tonight, to why that mattered. The technical word for what they did is katasterism. It is one of those Greek compound words that sounds dry until you sit with it for a minute. Kata, meaning down, or in this case, up into the sky. Aster, meaning star. To katasterize someone was to place them among the stars, to take a person, an animal, an object, and lift it permanently into the heavens, so that the story of that person would never end as long as anyone was looking up. The first man we know of who collected these placement stories into a single book was Eratosthenes of Cyrene, the same Greek polymath who calculated the circumference of the Earth in the 3rd century before the Common Era, working from the angle of shadows in 2 distant cities. His original book has been lost. What survived is a summary made later, called The Epitome of the Katasterisms, a scientist's catalogue of which constellation is which person, which beast, which divine accident. The poet Aratus of Soli wrote his Phenomena in the same century, listing the constellations in verse. The Roman writer Hyginus, a few hundred years after Aratus, expanded the catalogue in his Astronomica, adding variants when the Greek sources disagreed. And the Greek sources disagreed often. One of the constellations we are about to walk through is, in fact, the wrong figure. The wrong creature has stood up there for over 2,000 years, and almost nobody who looks at it tonight knows. Remember that. We will come back to it. So, east to west. The first sign is Aries. In the kingdom of Boeotia, in central Greece, there lived a king named Athamas. He had 2 children by his first wife, a cloud nymph named Nephele. Their names were Phrixus and Helle. The king's first marriage ended, in the way these stories go, Nephele drifted away, back to the clouds where she came from, and he took a second wife, a woman named Ino. Ino did not love her stepchildren. In fact, she conceived a slow and patient hatred for them, the kind that takes its time arranging the conditions of its own success. The conditions she arranged were these. She convinced the women of the kingdom to secretly roast all the seed grain before planting season, so that nothing would germinate. The crops failed. The fields stayed bare. A famine settled over the land. And when King Athamas, desperate, sent messengers to consult the oracle at Delphi, Ino bribed those messengers to come back with a false answer. The oracle, the messengers told the king, demanded the sacrifice of his eldest son. Phrixus must die, or the kingdom would starve. This is the moment in the story to sit with for a moment. A father, told by what he believes is the voice of the gods, that his son must be killed to save his people. Whether to believe in his own grief or in the duty of kingship. He chose the kingdom. But the boy's mother, the cloud nymph, had been watching from the sky. As Phrixus and his sister Helle were led to the altar at the top of Mount Lapistium, Nephele sent down a ram. Not an ordinary ram. This one had a fleece of gold and wings and the gift of flight. The children climbed onto its back, and the ram carried them up and east, away from the altar, away from Greece, toward the far edge of the known world. Somewhere over the strait of water that separates Europe from Asia, Helle lost her grip. She fell. She drowned. The strait has been called the Hellespont, the Sea of Helle, ever since, and is still called that on some maps today. The ram flew on with her brother on its back, all the way to the kingdom of Colchis on the eastern shore of the Black Sea. There, Phrixus dismounted, and the ram, by some accounts, instructed him to perform the sacrifice himself. Phrixus killed the animal that had saved his life, and laid its golden fleece in a sacred grove, where it would later become the object of the most famous quest in Greek myth, the journey of Jason and the Argonauts. That is the ram you can see in the sky. Not a hero, not a god, a creature whose entire existence was a single rescue mission and who paid for it with its life. Hera, or Zeus depending on the source, placed it among the stars. It is fittingly faint. You have to look carefully. The second sign is Taurus, the bull. Of all the misbehaviors of Zeus, and there were many, the abduction of Europa is the one the Greeks remembered with the most uncomfortable affection. The Roman poet Ovid told it in the Metamorphoses around the time of Christ, with a strange and lovely particularity. Zeus, smitten by the sight of the Phoenician princess Europa playing on the beach of Tyre with her companions, did not appear to her as himself. He shed his thunderbolts. He shed his throne. He chose instead to become a bull. Specifically, a snow-white bull, with muscles standing out along the neck and folds of soft skin hanging at the flanks. A bull so beautiful, Ovid says, that majesty and love simply cannot share the same body, and so the king of the gods abandoned his majesty for an afternoon to pursue the love. He drifted into King Agenor's grazing herd. He grazed. He lowed gently. He did not approach Europa. He simply waited to be approached, which is a much more effective strategy than most predators understand. Europa noticed him, of course. She wove flowers into wreaths and looped them around his horns. She stroked his white flank. He lowered himself into the sand, lamb-like, almost embarrassingly tame. She climbed onto his back, the way you might climb onto a friend's, expecting nothing more than a slow circle through the meadow. What she got was the open ocean. The bull rose, walked a few steps, and then, in one motion, plunged into the sea. Europa clung to his horns as the shore disappeared behind her. He swam with her on his back all the way to the island of Crete, where he revealed himself, where she became the first queen of that kingdom, and where their 3 sons, including Minos, would shape the next 1,000 years of Mediterranean myth. The continent we now call Europe takes its name from her. There are other identifications for Taurus. Some Greek mythographers suggested it was the Cretan bull, the same animal Heracles would later have to capture. Some tied it to Io, another of Zeus's victims, transformed into a heifer to hide her from his wife. The early Greek poet Aratus described the bull in the sky as crouching, lowering its 4 legs, almost as if it were inviting someone to climb onto its back. Just like the moment in Ovid. Star maps have shown it that way for centuries. You only see the front half of the bull in the sky. The torso, the head, the shoulders. The rest of him, by tradition, is still underwater. Mid-swim. Forever. The 3rd sign is Gemini. The twins. You have probably been told that Gemini means twin brothers, 2 boys side by side, marching across the spring sky. The brightest stars in the constellation are still called Castor and Pollux, but the original Greek story is darker and stranger than that, and like most of the best Greek stories, it begins with one of Zeus's affairs. Leda was the queen of Sparta. One day, Zeus came to her in the form of a swan. That same night, by some genuinely impressive coincidence, she also slept with her husband, King Tyndareus. She gave birth to 4 children, and the question of which of them had which father became one of the great unresolvable puzzles of Greek mythology. The most common version says she had 2 sets of twins. From one egg came Castor and his sister Clytemnestra, fathered by Tyndareus. From the other came Pollux, sometimes spelled Polydeuces, and his sister Helen, fathered by Zeus. Yes, that Helen. The one over whom the Trojan War would eventually be fought. What this meant for the twins, practically, was that one of them was mortal and the other was not. Castor would die. Pollux would not. They grew up not knowing this. They grew up the way brothers grow up, doing everything together. Castor became a famous horse tamer. Pollux, a boxer good enough to be remembered in legend. They sailed with Jason on the Argo. They rescued their sister Helen from kidnapping. They were so devoted to each other that the Greeks called them the Dioscuri, the sons of Zeus, even though only one of them really was, and worshipped them as the saviors of sailors lost at sea. And then Castor was killed. The story differs in the telling. In most versions, the twins were caught up in a quarrel over stolen cattle, or stolen wives, with 2 cousins named Idas and Lynceus. A spear thrown by Idas, or by Lynceus, ended Castor's life. This is the part that the constellation actually preserves. Pollux, immortal, could not die, and could not bring himself to live without his brother. He went to his father Zeus and begged. He asked for the impossible. He asked to give half of his immortality away. Zeus agreed. From that day forward, the brothers would alternate. One day on Olympus, one day in the underworld. Together always, but never both fully alive at the same time, never both fully dead. As a memorial, Zeus put them in the sky as a single constellation, 2 figures side by side, hand in hand, so that no one would forget what one brother was willing to trade, so the other would not be alone. If there is someone you would halve yourself for, someone whose absence you already know you could not survive, you understand what Pollux was asking for. That is the story Gemini is actually telling. Not twins, a bargain. The 4th sign is Cancer. Cancer, I have to be honest with you, is the constellation that comes closest to being a punchline. It is the dimmest sign of the zodiac. Its brightest star is barely brighter than the average street lamp seen from across a parking lot, and the story behind it is, by ancient Greek standards, almost embarrassingly small. You remember Heracles, 12 labors, most of them involving wrestling something invulnerable into submission while the goddess Hera tried to make his life impossible. The second of those labors was the killing of the Hydra, the many-headed serpent that lived in the swamps near the city of Lerna. Heracles fought it for hours. Every time he sliced off one of the Hydra's heads, 2 more grew back in its place. He had to call for his nephew Iolaus to bring fire and burn the necks shut so the heads would stop multiplying. In the middle of all this, in the middle of a hero's most famous battle, a giant crab, Karkanos in the Greek, emerged from the swamp and bit Heracles on the foot. Heracles, mid-fight with a regenerating monster, looked down, saw the crab, crushed it under his heel, returned to the Hydra. The whole exchange could not have lasted 10 seconds. But Hera was watching, and Hera, it turns out, had a soft spot for futile, loyal sacrifices made on her behalf. The crab had taken her side, in its small way, against the man she despised. And so she lifted it into the sky as a memorial. The crab who tried. There is something genuinely touching about this if you think about it long enough. Among 12 constellations honoring heroes and gods and tragic loves, one of them is just a crab who picked the wrong fight and got remembered anyway. The faintest sign in the zodiac is a monument to losing nobly. There is a kind of quiet dignity to that. The kind of dignity that nobody asked for, that nobody planned, that ended up immortal almost by accident. If you find yourself drawn to Cancer in the sky tonight, look at the soft, fuzzy cluster of stars at its center, called Presepe, the manger, by the Greeks. That is the heart of the crab. Faint, low, and old. The 5th sign is Leo. Leo is one of the few constellations that genuinely looks like the thing it is supposed to be. A long arc of stars curves backward from a forward-facing head, like a sickle, or the silhouette of a sphinx in profile. The star at the heart of the lion is called Regulus, from the Latin for little king. The Babylonians had already seen a lion here 1,000 years before the Greeks named it. It is one of the oldest patterns the human eye has ever read out of randomness. The Greek story attached to it is the first labor of Heracles, the Nemean lion. By most accounts, the offspring of 2 of the most terrifying creatures in Greek myth, Echidna, the half-woman, half-serpent, and either Typhon or Orthrus, monsters in their own right. The lion was raised, depending on the source you trust, by the moon goddess Selene, or by Hera herself, on the slopes above the town of Nemea. It was specifically, deliberately bred to be unkillable. Its hide could not be pierced by any weapon. Bronze blades shattered against it, arrows slid off it like water off a stone. This is the lion that Heracles was sent to kill, with no weapons that could possibly work. He went anyway. He shot at the lion first. The arrows were useless, exactly as advertised. He swung his club. The club broke. The lion retreated into a cave with 2 entrances, and Heracles, no longer hopeful but no longer alarmed either, simply blocked one of the entrances with stones and walked in through the other one. What happened in the cave is the moment that defined him. Without weapons, without armor. He cornered the lion, got his arm around its neck, and choked it to death with his bare hands. He skinned it afterward using one of its own claws, since nothing else could cut the hide. He wore the pelt for the rest of his life. In every Greek statue and every Roman coin where you see Heracles, you see a man with the head of a lion pulled over his own head like a hood. That is this lion. That is the pelt of the creature bred to kill him. Hera, when it was over, lifted the lion into the sky. Not Heracles. The lion. The thing she had raised, the thing she had hoped would rid her of her husband's bastard son, the thing that had failed her. She put it in the heavens anyway, because even monsters can be loved by their mothers. The sixth sign is Virgo. Of all the constellations in the zodiac, Virgo is the one that is hardest to summarize because she is not one figure. She is at least four. The Greeks could not agree on who the maiden in the sky actually was, and the disagreement itself is part of the story. Hyginus, in the 2nd century, listed 3 identifications side by side and let the reader pick. She is Demeter, holding the sheaf of wheat, the goddess of the harvest who created winter when her daughter Persephone was abducted into the underworld. She is Erigone, the Athenian girl who hanged herself from a tree after finding the body of her murdered father. She is Astrea, the Star Maiden, the goddess of justice who lived among humans during the golden age of the world. Astrea is the story most often told, and it is the saddest of the 3. In the beginning, the poet Aratus tells us, "The gods walked among us. There was no winter. There was no war. The crops grew on their own, and people did not yet know how to lie." Justice, Astrea, the Star Maiden, daughter of the dawn, moved freely through the marketplaces and the village squares, settling disputes, urging kindness, treating mortals as her own. She was not invisible. She was not abstract. She was a woman in a robe with a pair of scales in her hand, and people knew her by name. But the Golden Age did not last. The Silver Age came, and humans began to argue with each other. The Bronze Age came, and they began to make swords. The Iron Age came, and they began to use them. The other gods left, one by one, retreating to Olympus. Astrea was the last to go. She walked the earth alone for a long time, looking for someone good. When she found no one, she lifted into the sky and became the constellation we still call the Virgin. The scales she had carried became the constellation next to her, but we will come back to that in a moment. This is the part of the story that the Romans loved, and that the Renaissance loved after them. Virgil, in his 4th eclogue, prophesied that one day Astrea would return to Earth, and the Golden Age would begin again. The myth has been carried century after century by people who could not quite let go of the idea that there was once a better world, and that someone in the sky still remembers it. When you find Virgo tonight, and she rises in the spring, bright with a single brilliant blue-white star called Spica at her left hand, the ear of wheat she carries, try not to think of her as a horoscope sign. Think of her as a woman who could not stand to live among us anymore, who is still up there, watching, who, if the old poets were right, is still hoping we will deserve her again. The 7th sign is Libra, the scales. This is the constellation I asked you to remember. The strange one, the wrong one in a way. Libra is the only zodiac sign that is not a creature. 11 of them are people, animals, or animal hybrids. Libra is a pair of weighing scales, an object, and it is the only one of the 12 that the Greeks themselves did not originally recognize as a separate constellation at all. Here is what happened. The Babylonians, around 1,000 years before the Common Era, identified that section of the night sky as the Zibanu, the balance of heaven, the scales sacred to the sun god Shamash, who was also the patron of justice. But when the Greeks inherited the zodiac from the Babylonians, they read those same stars differently. They saw them as the long, forward-reaching claws of the next constellation over. Scorpio. The 2 stars at the top of Libra are still called by their Arabic names, Zuben es-Shamali and Zuben el-Ganubi, the northern claw and the southern claw, linguistic fossils from the time when this section of the sky was the front of the scorpion, not a sign of its own. The Romans, around 2,000 years ago, restored the older Babylonian reading. They took the claws back from the scorpion and made them scales again. They tied the scales to the goddess Astrea, to the virgin you just learned about, who carried them when she walked among mortals, and who, when she left for the sky, set them down beside her. There she is. There they are. The scales are still next to her. They have been for 2,000 years. The reason this matters, beyond the trivia of it, is the timing. The sun used to cross the celestial equator in this constellation at the autumn equinox. Day and night were equal in length. The Romans, who loved omens and pattern, looked up and saw the perfect symbol, scales hanging level, exactly where day and night themselves were level. Think about the last time you stood at the exact middle of something, the day you could feel yourself between who you were and who you were becoming, when the weight on both sides was equal. The Romans built an entire sign of the zodiac on that feeling. The astronomy and the metaphor agreed. They could not resist. The equinox has since drifted. The slow wobble of the Earth's axis means that the autumn equinox now happens with the sun in Virgo, not Libra, and will continue to drift forward over the coming centuries. But the scales are still there. The metaphor is still there. We have a sign in our zodiac that is technically a tool that once balanced the world. If you have ever been told that Libra means you value fairness, the version you are reading is roughly 5,000 years old and was first written, if anything was first written about it at all, on a clay tablet in a city that no longer exists. The eighth sign is Scorpio. To understand Scorpio, you have to first understand Orion, who is not a zodiac sign and therefore not on our walk tonight, but who is impossible to avoid. Orion was a giant, the son of the sea god Poseidon, depending on the version, a hunter so skilled that even the gods praised him. He was tall, beautiful, arrogant, and, in some versions of his story, the favorite hunting companion of the goddess Artemis, with whom he hunted on the island of Crete. He was also, by every account, far too in love with himself. There are 3 versions of how he died, and each blames a different god. In the oldest, recorded by Hesiod sometime in the 7th century before the Common Era, Orion stood one day on Crete and proclaimed that he intended to kill every wild beast on the surface of the earth, every animal. There would be nothing left for any other hunter, ever. The earth herself, Gaia, the mother of all, heard this and was furious. She sent up from the soil a single creature, a giant scorpion, far smaller than Orion, but armed with a sting that no flesh could survive. The scorpion stung Orion in the heel. He died. In the second version, Artemis sent the scorpion. Orion had bragged to her face, or had assaulted her, or had simply stopped listening to her. She sent the scorpion in punishment, and it killed him. In the third version, Apollo sent it. Apollo was Artemis's twin brother, and he had grown jealous of the closeness between her and Orion, and so he tricked his sister, pointed out a tiny dot bobbing in the distant sea, dared her to shoot it as a test of skill. She shot. The dot was Orion's head. He drowned. In every version, Zeus, who admired both the hunter and the killer, placed both of them in the sky, but not next to each other. He arranged the heavens so that the 2 constellations would never appear at the same time. Watch this for yourself on any clear night. As Orion sets in the west, Scorpio rises in the east. As Scorpio rises, Orion goes down. They are never both visible. 2,500 years after the story was first told, the sky still keeps them apart. The Roman writer Hyginus said, very simply, that Zeus put the scorpion up there as a lesson to mortals against being too sure of themselves. It is one of the few zodiac constellations that explicitly points a moral finger at the people looking up. Do not boast, the sky says, about the scope of your own competence. Something will rise from a place you were not watching and end you. The 9th sign is Sagittarius, the archer. This is the constellation I told you we would come back to. The wrong one. If you were taught the Greek myths in school, or if you have ever read a children's book about astrology, you have probably been told that Sagittarius is the centaur Chiron, the wise teacher who taught Achilles, Asclepius, and a dozen other heroes, accidentally shot by Heracles with an arrow dipped in Hydra's poison, who gave up his immortality to end the agony and was placed in the sky as a memorial. That is a true story, but it is the story of a different constellation. There are 2 centaurs in the Greek night sky. One of them is called Centaurus, low in the southern sky, and he is Chiron. The other is Sagittarius. According to Eratosthenes, the figure in Sagittarius is not a centaur at all. He is a satyr, the upper body of a man, the lower body of a goat, with 2 legs and a long horse-like tail. His name is Crotus. You have probably never heard of Crotus. Crotus was the son of the god Pan, the inventor of archery, and the constant companion of the Muses on Mount Helicon. He invented applause. The Greek word for clapping is krotos, and according to one strand of myth, this is where the word comes from, the sound the Muses' favorite listener made when they sang. He was a hunter, a musician, and according to those who knew him, the most loving audience the 9 sisters ever had. When Crotus died, the Muses went directly to Zeus. They asked for him to be placed among the stars, in honor of his skill and his love for their music. Zeus, who rarely refused the Muses anything, agreed. He set Crotus in the sky with his bow drawn, his arrow pointed forever at the heart of the next constellation over. Scorpio, the very scorpion that had killed Orion, as if Crotus is keeping watch, ready to fire if the scorpion ever stirs. The Romans, centuries later, mistook the satyr's 2 legs for a centaur's 4, and the misidentification has stood for 2,000 years. Most of the people who look up at Sagittarius tonight, including most amateur astronomers, will tell you they are looking at Chiron. They are not. They are looking at a forgotten satyr who clapped for the Muses and who taught the world how to use a bow. This is why I love these old catalogues. The stories underneath the stories are almost always more interesting than the ones on top. The 10th sign is Capricorn, the sea goat. I want you to picture this very clearly, because it is one of the strangest images in any mythology, anywhere. A goat, the forelegs and the chest and the head of a goat, complete with horns, and then, where the back legs should be, the long muscular tail of a fish. That is Capricorn. That is what is in the sky? The image is not Greek. The Babylonians and Sumerians had been drawing the sea goat for at least 1,000 years before the Greeks ever encountered it. They called it the Su-her-mash-ha, the goat fish, and it was the symbol of their wisdom god Ea, who lived under the freshwater sea. When the Greeks inherited the constellation, they had to invent a story for it, because the original Sumerian story did not survive the journey across cultures. The story they invented, or perhaps borrowed and rewrote, goes like this. The gods, late in their war with the Titans, faced one final monster that the Titans' mother Gaia had sent against them. His name was Typhon. He had 100 dragon heads, fire in every eye, and wings so wide they blotted out the sun. He was, by the Greeks' own admission, the most terrifying thing they ever imagined. The gods scattered. Specifically, they fled to Egypt, to the banks of the Nile, and there, hiding from Typhon's approach, they each transformed into different animals to disguise themselves. Apollo became a hawk, Artemis became a cat, Hermes became a bird, and Pan, the goat god, the patron of shepherds and wild places, saw the monster coming and panicked. He leapt into the river, intending to become a fish. He only half managed it. The half of him under the water became a fish tail. The half of him above the water stayed a goat. He surfaced like that, half fish, half goat. And the other gods, even in the middle of fleeing the worst monster they had ever seen, laughed. According to the Roman author Hyginus, this is the form Zeus eventually placed in the sky, not as a punishment, as a tribute. Because in the larger story, Pan helped save Zeus's life. When Typhon had torn the sinews from Zeus's body and hidden them in a Cilician cave, Pan and Hermes were the ones who recovered them, and gave the king of the gods his strength back. Some sources also identify Capricorn with Amalthea, the divine goat who suckled the infant Zeus when his mother hid him from his father in a Cretan cave. The two stories are almost certainly fused in different telling traditions. What both have in common is rescue. The goat in the sky, in either reading, saved a god. That is what the half-goat, half-fish in the sky actually is. A frightened deity who improvised, who saved the king of the gods because he was too scared to think of anything cleverer to do. There is, somewhere in that, a quiet lesson about how often the world has been saved by people who had no idea what they were doing. The 11th sign is Aquarius, the water-bearer, the boy in the sky pouring water down toward the southern fish. And yes, the cup he holds and the stream he pours have their own faint stars, traced out by Greek astronomers over 2,000 years ago, is named Ganymede. He was a Trojan prince, the son of King Tros, after whom the city of Troy was named, and he was the most beautiful mortal who ever lived. Homer says so directly in the Iliad. The most beautiful born of mortals, so beautiful that the gods themselves, looking down, decided he could not stay among ordinary humans. The story Homer tells is brief and almost gentle. Ganymede was tending sheep on the slopes of Mount Ida near Troy when an eagle descended from the sky. In some versions, the eagle was Zeus's eagle. In others, the eagle was Zeus himself, taking the form of a bird in order to come down without being seen. The eagle lifted the boy from the hillside and carried him up to Olympus, where the gods made him their cup-bearer. He poured the wine, the divine drink called nectar, at every feast on the mountain for the rest of eternity. He was given immortality and eternal youth. He never aged a day past the boy he was on the hillside. His father Tros, on earth, grieved. Zeus felt enough guilt about this to send the messenger god Hermes down with compensation. A herd of immortal horses, the finest in the world, given to Tros so he would understand his son was alive, was happy, would never grow old. It is one of the few times in Greek myth that Zeus tries to apologize for something. The apology is not adequate. It rarely is. The constellation we call Aquarius is Ganymede pouring his cup. The eagle that carried him, called Aquila, is in the sky right next to him. You can see it on a summer night, with its bright star Altair forming part of the summer triangle. The two constellations are positioned so that the eagle is forever poised above the boy, mid-flight. The abduction never quite finishes. He never quite reaches the top. The Babylonians, before the Greeks, had identified this constellation as Gu.La, the Great One. The same wisdom god Ea, who, you may remember, was associated with the goatfish next door. He was usually depicted holding an overflowing vase. The Greeks took the figure of the man with the vase and turned him into a story about a stolen child. The vase remained. The water remained. Only the meaning of the figure changed. Aquarius is a faint constellation. Its brightest stars are dim. The boy in the sky is, fittingly, hard to find. You have to look carefully. The story is buried under 25 centuries. The 12th and final sign is Pisces, the fishes. Two fish swimming in opposite directions, joined together by a long ribbon or cord that runs between their tails. The cord itself has its own star, the brightest in the constellation, called Alresja, Arabic for the cord, at the point where the two halves of the cord knot together. This is the constellation we are walking through now, the very last. The story is the same monster we have already met twice. Typhon, the 100-headed dragon. The thing the gods fled from in Egypt, and that gave Pan the goatfish his improvised disguise. In this version, the gods Aphrodite and her son Eros, the goddess of love and the god of desire, were walking along the river Euphrates when they saw Typhon coming. Aphrodite, who was many things but not a fighter, knew she could not outrun him. She picked up her son, prayed to the river nymphs, and leapt into the water. In some versions, she and Eros transformed themselves into fish, and the cord that joins them in the sky is the cord they tied around each other's tails so they would not be separated in the current. In other versions, two fish that were already swimming in the river took pity on the goddess and her son and carried them on their backs to safety. In every version, the fish, or the disguised gods, became the constellation Pisces. There is something quietly significant in this story. Typhon terrified the gods of love. The terror that has rolled through these zodiac stories, the boasting hunter, the jealous queen, the cosmic monster, finally arrives at the simplest emotion any of us know, and even there, terror wins. Even Aphrodite hides. Even Eros hides. Love in this story is something that goes underwater when the danger is too great. That ducks beneath the surface of the river and stays there, attached to its companion by a cord, until the danger has passed. The original story is older than Greek. The fish in question were originally Syrian, the protectors of the goddess Atargatis, who the Greeks identified with their own Aphrodite. In some Syrian cults, fish were considered sacred and were not eaten, because the worshippers feared they might be one of the fish that had once saved the goddess. That tradition lasted into the Roman period. When you find Pisces tonight, it is among the dimmest of the zodiac constellations, fainter even than Cancer to most observers. You will need a dark sky and a patient eye, but the cord is there. The two fish are still swimming. Whatever you have to hide from in your own life, the sky has been carrying that story for you since long before either of us were born. That is the zodiac. 12 constellations, 12 names, 12 specific sets of human hands that grasped at something, a rescue, a promise, a brother, and 12 sets of consequences that the Greeks decided were too large or too sad or too important to let go of after the people involved had died. Here is what most retellings leave out. The zodiac was not designed as a story, not originally. It was designed by the Babylonians as a clock. 12 constellations along the path of the sun, one for each month of the year, so that any farmer could look up at any night and know roughly what season he was in, what crops he should be planting, when the rains would arrive. It was practical. It was agricultural. It was about food and time and survival. What the Greeks did when they inherited this clock was something almost no other culture has done quite as thoroughly. They turned every single one of those 12 agricultural markers into a memorial for a person, or a creature, or a god, sometimes mid-disaster. They took the sky, the eternal, unchanging, indifferent sky, and they wrote stories on it the way you might carve a name into the bark of a tree. So the name would be there even after you were gone. So the night, every night, would still remember. That is what catasterism actually was. It was a defense against being forgotten. A wolf bound under the world has its own kind of immortality. A goddess of justice who left in protest has hers. A boy stolen by an eagle has his. A girl who slipped from a flying ram and drowned in the sea. Hela, whose name labels the strait she fell into, has hers too, and the most quiet of them all. The Greeks understood, in a way that very few cultures have understood since, that the worst thing that can happen to a person is not to die. It is to die, and have nobody remember why. So they put the why in the sky. The story is finished now, or rather, it has reached the place where stories like this one don't end so much as settle. Into memory, into the dark, into the quiet space where meaning lives after the words stop. Every constellation in the zodiac is a Greek funeral. You know that now. You can look up tonight, or tomorrow, or 20 years from tomorrow, and find the ram, the bull, the brothers, the crab, the lion, the maiden, the scales, the scorpion, the satyr, the goat, the boy, the fish. And every one of them will be where they were when Aratus and Eratosthenes and Hyginus first wrote them down, and where they were 1,000 years before that, when a Babylonian priest first traced the same patterns on a clay tablet by the light of an oil lamp. That is older than empires, older than most of the languages people speak today, older than almost anything you can name. You don't have to hold on to any of it. The best of it will still be there in the morning, and in 100 mornings, and in 100,000 mornings after that. If this story found you at the right moment, if it gave you something to carry into sleep, or something to let go of before you got there, consider subscribing to Sleepable Mythology. There are more of these waiting. More gods, more monsters, more nights spent wandering through stories older than memory. Next, Orion, the hunter who couldn't stop boasting, who was loved by the goddess who killed him, and whose death gave us the scorpion in the sky. He didn't make it into the zodiac. His story is bigger than 12 signs could hold. Sleep well, knowing that the stars above your house tonight are the same ones an ancient Greek astronomer once mapped by hand. Sleep well, knowing that 12 very specific people, animals, and divine accidents have been kept alive, not by anyone living, but by the simple fact that someone, once, looked up and refused to forget. Good night. Good.